As I mentioned earlier, a couple of weeks ago, we began a brand new series that we entitled Under the Influence. And when we use that phrase, I recognize that for a lot of us, our mind begins to drift and we immediately think of someone who's under the influence of drugs or alcohol. That's pretty familiar to us. Maybe even under the influence of peer pressure. We recognize how that can impact life. And then there are people who are under the influence of strong emotions, and maybe you felt that at a different time or two in your story. But there is another thing that we can be under the influence of that is just sort of emerged over time, and we don't give it much thought, and yet it derives and directs so much of how we interact in our everyday lives. Because many of us are under the influence of technology. And so throughout this series, we've talked about some different things. We've talked about the digital algorithm and how we can be under the influence of that algorithm. And we've talked recently about the digital companions and how we can be under the influence of those digital companions. But today I want to talk about digital overload and how so many of us are under the influence of this enormous amount of content. Years ago, as a child, my mother would take us to the library. And especially during the summer months, she would take us to the library because there at the library, there was seemingly an infinite number of books about any topic that you could imagine. And as a small child, and then even growing up into some of my teen years, my mom would kind of create this rule. And she said, you can get any book that you want, but I want to make sure that you have a wide variety of books. And so she would insist that we have one biography, one book about science, one book about history, one book about sports, and then we could get kind of this collection of anything else that would take us up to the maximum number of books that we could check out. And so we would get this wide variety of different topics, and we would read those books. And as I grew a little bit older, ironically, one of my first jobs, as soon as I was old enough to work, was in that library. And I was the guy that put all the books back in order where they were supposed to go on the shelves. So yes, I do know the Dewey Decimal System. But that was kind of my job, and I even did that in college to help pay my way through school. And as I worked there, what I realized was the amount of information I had access to was absolutely enormous. And as a book would come across the counter and I would see that book and it would interest me, I would check that book out and I would read it. And I read so many books during that season. And yet somehow I was never able to read the entire library. And that's only intensified. Because now, if you want information, you can go online to an app and you can sort through a variety of books, and you'll find books that are put together by well-known authors and are bestsellers, and then you'll find books that are self-published, and you can spend literally years of your life reading books in one small, narrow segment of a topic. There is seemingly endless information. And it's not just endless in the library. Because for many of us, we now encounter endless music. We don't go to the store and flip through a variety of albums or discs. Now we simply scroll. We jump on an app, and on that app, we can find top 40 artists, we can find indie artists, and we can fall in love with a genre of music. And there are so many creators of that one genre that we can listen to it for days and not hear the same artist over again. There's an endless supply of music. But we're already familiar with that because there's endless scrolling on some of our favorite apps. We can jump on and read about our friend and then read about somebody we've never met before. We can see photos from somebody that is very close to us in our family and photos of people that we only dream of being like. And we can see video content that's created, and you can scroll through video after video after video after video after video and not run out of videos to watch. There's endless scrolling. And then there's endless news. You can sit down in front of a TV or in front of your computer and you can watch endless news because there's a 24-hour news cycle. And so somebody somewhere is talking about what's happening or their opinion on what's happening. And you can see all different kinds of news. You can jump on your news apps and scroll through and you see news story after news story. And then you can read news that people in your part of the world don't even care about, but that's very, very important to people in some other part of the world. There's endless news. And there's endless information. If you pick a topic and you start to lean in to learn that topic, there's endless websites that you can go to, videos you can watch, books about that, blogs that have been written, podcasts where people are talking about that topic. And what scientists tell us is that information, data, all of these endless things, they are compounding, literally doubling every year, every 2 to 3 years, which means that as much information as is in the world today, in 2 years, there will be twice as much information and options as what you are navigating right now. And as a result, the search functions that we lean into, they have to get better. The filters that we lean on, they become even more crucial. And in today's day and age, AI discovers the patterns. It begins to serve as the gatekeeper of the resources that it offers to us. Because no longer can we be sure we saw everything. We don't have time to see everything. And so AI goes, here is the information that is most helpful to you based on the things that I've seen be helpful to you in the past. And in a world of endless, we start to feel some things become at risk. Our focus is at risk because it's difficult to focus on what needs to be done when there's all of these other distractions that can steal our attention away. Our attention is at risk because no longer can we put our attention towards our greatest priorities because there is this constant noise that lurks in the background. And our confidence is at risk because the sources that we read, the sources that we believe, all of us, though we can't define it, we recognize that there is an algorithm at play in it. And we don't know whether to trust even what we see with our own eyes. And as a result, it brings increased distraction. Increased distraction because if we're honest, there's a part of us that's addicted to that constant engagement as we scroll, as we click, as we see new content, new information that captures our attention. There's increased anxiety because it gets harder and harder to make decisions as we go through everyday life because of all the options that are available to us. And there's increased mental fatigue because there is so much overwhelm that we are navigating in our lives. And at the end of the day, endless selection, it sucks our time away, it increases our anxiety, it polarizes our thinking, and it fuels our indecision. And whether this is your first Sunday sitting in a church or your 500th Sunday sitting in here, we're all asking this same underlying question. Some version of this. How do we stay sane in a world of ever-increasing, endless selections? And I would suggest to you this morning that though endless data was not the primary struggle of people who lived in the first century, there was an underlying human condition that was present then and is present in us now that allows the endless selection to be so significant in our stories. And Luke was a contemporary of Jesus, and he was a very careful researcher, and he created a documentary of Jesus' life. And it was one of those biographies that serves as kind of the introduction to who Jesus is that's bound together in our scriptures. And so we're going to dive in to one of Luke's stories that he captures as he heard it told, as he saw it play out. Here's what Luke says. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. Now, this village, we find out from other sources, is likely the town named Bethany. It was about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. And Martha lived in that village, but she lived there alongside her sister Mary and her brother Lazarus. And their story is told in a couple other places within the Gospels, those biographies of Jesus. But Luke continues, and he says, she had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. So Jesus shows up at Martha and Mary and Lazarus' home, and as he does, he's got some of his followers with him, his disciples, and Jesus begins to teach. And as he sits down, maybe on a stool, maybe on a rock, and he's sitting there, he begins to teach the people who are listening. And Mary, she sits down and listens as well. Now, what's fascinating is this, Luke describes what's happening. This is a very familiar posture to the people in that era, because it was the posture that scholars would take as they would listen to the rabbi, as the rabbi would unpack the teaching that they were there to share. And so Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus as if he is this esteemed teacher, and she's not only understanding what he's saying, but she's capturing these things. It was a deliberate posture. It was a posture of deference to the teacher. It expressed curiosity. There was a dependence on what was being said and a devotion to the one that was saying it. And years ago, a famous preacher said, it's no small thing that Mary would sit at the feet of Jesus, because at the feet of Jesus, she was able to find peace and holiness and strength and joy and wisdom and zeal, passion. So Mary, she sat down and listened to what Jesus had to say. Luke continues and he says, but Martha, her sister, Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made, all the things that were going on. So she came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Now, some of us, as we read this, I mean, you're sitting there going, oh, I feel that. I know what's going on in my world. I know how these things play out at my house. And she says, I have all the preparation, all the things to take care of. And for you and me, we'd be like, yeah, Jesus, tell him to help. Tell her to step it up. And that's where Martha is. She's real. And Jesus responds to Martha. It says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. Martha's sitting there going, yeah, the house needs to be cleaned. The flowers had to be planted. The yard had to be mowed. The beds had to be made. The towels had to be put out. The table's got to be set. The playlist has to be curated. The recipes have to be selected. Groceries have to be shopped for. The food has to be prepared. That's what it would look like for us if we were having Jesus and his followers over to our place. And for Martha, it looked a little different, but there was a lot to be done. And for Martha, she felt distracted in all of this chaos. And it's not too unlike us in our stories today. Because for a lot of us, we've got kids or grandkids, we've got a job, we've got school, we've got sports that they're playing, we've got news we're trying to keep up with, we have relationships that we're trying to nurture. And if we're honest, we need Martha. Because if there is no Martha, there is no dinner. But as Jesus looks at Martha, don't miss his description. Because he says, Martha, you're distracted. Your mind is divided. You're worried. You're anxious. You're upset. There's this low hum that goes on in your soul because there's so much to do and so much that's left undone. And as a result, you're overwhelmed. And I would imagine that this is not that different from how Jesus might describe us. Andy, you are distracted and anxious and overwhelmed by many things. Put your name in there. If Jesus spent 3 hours with you this afternoon, would he look at you and say, you're distracted and anxious and overwhelmed by so many things? And sure, some of those things, they require our physical energy. But some of those things, they consume our mental energy. And Jesus continues with Martha, and he says, but few things are needed, or indeed, only one. Only a few things are important, maybe even just one thing. Because what Jesus knew was that not everything urgent deserves equal attention. Not everything that's urgent in our lives deserves equal attention from our lives. And Jesus says, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. She's chosen what is better. And as Jesus looks at Martha, and as Jesus looks at us, as we navigate the endless supply that we live in, he says simply, choose better. Choose the better thing. Choose what's better. You see, if you think about it, Jesus could have been the most chaotic person you and I would ever observe. Because he comes to this earth sent from God, and he has 3 years of public ministry. And yet within those 3 years, there are so many people to heal, so many people to speak to, so many people to visit with one-on-one. And in the face of this endless responsibility, Jesus himself chooses better. He chooses the better part daily. And Luke, the one who researched and documented this story of Jesus, earlier in his writing documents another story. And he says it this way: yet the news about him, Jesus, spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places, and he prayed. There were crowds of people that came. They were clamoring for his attention. They always wanted more. There was so much healing that needed to be done. His teaching was so profound that it rocked their world. And yet in the face of all of these people, Jesus had this habit of walking away from them, withdrawing, stepping aside from the chaos and connecting with his heavenly Father, because he knew what mattered most. So when we say choose better, it doesn't mean that there's nothing else going on. Doesn't mean that the house doesn't get cleaned or the groceries don't get purchased or the work project doesn't get tackled or the research doesn't get completed. But instead, choose better. Choose better means we choose the ultimate before the urgent. And there's so much in our lives that feels urgent. The playlist that just a new song had been suggested, or the news alert that shows up on our phone, the social post that popped up. Think of it like this. In most modern cars, there is a volume control that is on the steering wheel. And it's given to the one who's driving the car for a reason. Can you imagine if the volume control was given to the 3-year-old who's in the back seat? There would be chaos in the car. And there's a distinct reason that the volume control is given to the driver of the car, because you can't get where you're going if you are overwhelmed by noise. It's impossible. So you get to call the shots in the car on your entertainment system. And I would suggest that even if you're not sure what you believe about Jesus, you probably would line up for a clearer mind, less anxiety, and better decisions. You'd be happy with less noise, more stillness, and better priorities. And when Jesus says choose better allows us to find some steps that, at best, provide just that. But for those of us who are Jesus followers, these steps that I'm about to unpack allow for more than just a better life. They allow for a pathway to a deeper relationship with Jesus as we follow him. So I would suggest that first off, we have to choose better attention. There's 3 different ways that we can begin to leverage this. The first is very, very practical. We can turn off notifications. And for a lot of us, we know that we have the ability to turn off notifications, but we just don't take the time to do it. But as we load an app and it says, hey, do you want to know? We feel this tinge of, well, I don't want to not know. And so we leave that notification on. And yet those notifications pop up at all different weird times. And we can turn off the notifications on our social posts. Just yesterday, I was on a morning run, and my watch begins to announce a social post that one of my many friends had posted. It was completely irrelevant to my life, but it decided to read me that post. But that would be one of those things that just pops up on our phones, and we feel this, I wonder what they said, and we feel the urge to click through. We can turn off our news notifications, because everything is breaking news and we don't want to miss something. And so we look at all of these things that are completely irrelevant. There are the sales that we get notified about, and we find ourselves within 100 feet of our favorite store, and they're announcing what we could buy today if we would just step in, or what pizza we could order because it happens to be the same night that we ordered pizza a week ago. And we're drawn in to all of these notifications. And for those of us who are busy at work, we've got our email notifications, we've got our Slack notifications, and everything is dumping in. And we're constantly being drawn away from the things we want to put our attention on. We can turn off our notifications. We can limit our screen time. And some of you, you've done this for your kids or your grandkids. But what if you did it for yourself? Not that you couldn't enter the passcode and move on past it, but what if you saw how frequently you just went to that app because you were bored, because you were distracted, because you couldn't quite concentrate, so you clicked that button to see if anybody had said anything new, done anything new, added anything new? What if you chose to think before you asked your AI app how to handle a situation? Because for many of us, because it's available to us, We don't spend much time pondering what to do. We just ask chat what it is that we ought to do, or what it is that it would do, or how to solve a problem. And we don't spend as much time thinking about it. But we have the opportunity to do that. What if we limited our screen time by responding on our schedule, not somebody else's? Promptly, to be sure. But what if we didn't respond to every email within 2 minutes after it arrived and notified us that it was there? What if we didn't respond to every text message the moment it was sent, but we responded in a timely fashion, but in an intentional one that didn't make us the servant of whoever reached out just a moment ago? Limit screen time. And thirdly, start with silence. You see, as Jesus saw all the crowds and all the chaos, he still chose to pull aside, to go into the desert, the wilderness, to pull aside in a place where there wasn't anybody. And for Jesus, that wasn't an escape from life, but it was instead a preparation for it. Because Jesus understood that you could find interior silence even when there was exterior chaos. And for a lot of us, if we look at our lives and we're honest, there's a lot of exterior chaos. There's a lot going on in the lives of people we love. There's a lot going on in our lives. There's a lot of endless information, resources, opportunities. There's a lot of commitments. There's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of exterior chaos. But what if we were purposeful to pull aside daily? And as we talked a little bit about last week, to allow the words of Jesus, allow the words of his Father, allow the words of Scripture to shape us. Because we're being shaped by something. Do we want it to be the endless supply of voices? Or do we want it to be the one that we've said we're here to follow? Do we take time to pray? Not so we can list off all of our demands, but so that we can listen to discern what is the most Jesus-like thing I can do next in this moment. What if we start with silence? Choose better attention, but also choose better priorities. In a world with endless selection, it causes so many things to fight to be first. But we can choose better priorities if we calendar in order. You see, for many of us, if we were to say, hey, what are your priorities? We would have a list of what those things are. You put a mic in my face, I would tell you that Jesus is my primary, he's my primary priority, and then my spouse, and then my family, and then my work. And many of you would say, yeah, those are very similar to mine, depending on your life situation. But then when we go to calendar, we calendar based on what comes to us first. So the sports schedule comes in and we calendar that. The school schedule comes in, we calendar that. The opportunities come in, we calendar that. The work commitments come in, we calendar that. And then we find, good grief, I didn't save any time at all for silence to connect with Jesus. I didn't save any time at all for the relationship, the human relationship that I say is most important to me. And we begin trying to sandwich those things in. But technology actually allows us to calendar on purpose, to calendar in order of our priorities. What if we choose better priorities by calendaring in order? What if we opt for analog? There are certain things that we leverage technology for and it helps us go so much further faster. But what if on purpose we said, you know what, there are some things that I am intentionally going to do in an analog fashion. What if that time that you spend with your family, you take your phone and you set it aside? You don't have it sitting there to buzz beside you, to alert you, to bother you. The time that you spend around the table eating a meal, the time that you spend on a date night. What if you just set that phone to the side? What if you did church in analog? I know that for many of us, we can watch it online, we can catch up later, we can see it, we can stream it, but there's something special about being together and connected. We were actually designed that way on purpose. What if we did church in analog as much as is possible? And I know that our online stream, we have guests that join us all the time to see what our church is like, and I'm so glad we can offer that as a benefit. And as we travel and we're in other parts of the world, it's such a helpful tool. But when we're 10 minutes away or 20 minutes away, what if we opt for analog? What if we opt for analog in the face-to-face relationships that matter most to us? There's so much that we can do digitally as we send text messages or jump on a Zoom call, but what about those moments where we can connect in person? You know that it's true in business, that there's something that happens when you're with that person and you see it pay dividends later on. What if those same dividends could be captured in some of the other areas of your life that you consider a priority? Choose better attention, choose better priorities, and choose better decisions. There's a key way to manage better decisions. And in the world of endless, that is to decide on a deadline. Because in a world of endless, we now have unlimited information. And for some of us, depending how you're wired, you're going to lean into that unlimited information and continue to research and continue to study and continue to explore until you're certain that there is nothing unturned, that you've not missed out on a better deal or more information that would have made you brighter or more informed. And we're wired that way for many of us. There was a time not long ago that I was buying an airline ticket, and I was trying to find the best day to travel, the best path to travel, so that I could save a little bit of money. And as I was doing the research, the prices went up in real time. I literally cost myself money by trying to save myself money. But that happens in other areas of our lives as well. So what if? What if we decide that I'm going to make a decision by this date? What if we say, I'm going to decide after I've checked out 3 different sites and figured out which one had the best price, instead of wasting our lives trying to navigate the endless? What if we didn't shop all the options? What if we didn't read all the different selections? It would allow us to choose better. Choose better attention, choose better priorities, choose better decisions. And I know that there's this tension here, because for all of us, we go, I don't know that I have time to do things any differently than I'm doing right now. But this isn't designed to add another task. Instead, it's streamlining your sanity. And it helps us navigate three common struggles that you may not even know you're trying to navigate in real time. There's the attention residue. The attention residue is the reality that as we switch from one task to another task, from one app to another app, that part of our mind stays stuck on the thing that we were just doing, even as we move on to another thing. And so all of our attention doesn't shift to the new thing. Instead, we begin to sprinkle it out onto other things as we leave those things behind and focus on the next thing. There's choice overload. It's a documented fact that the more options we have, the worse the choices are that we make. And then there's the dopamine loops. And though we may not think about it, you've likely felt it. It's the occasional reward that we feel in our minds when we are endlessly scrolling. as we find something that interests us, or something that's informative, something that's appealing. And when we see that thing, we're enticed to keep scrolling so that we see the next thing that gives us that same reward. That's the dopamine loops. And all of these things, they weaken our focus as we navigate a life with endless selections. But what if, like Martha, in a world of endless responsibilities, in our world with endless inputs, endless choices, endless duties, what if we choose better? Better attention, better priorities, better decisions. Then, in a harried, anxious, polarized, indecisive world, we could be more like the one that we say that we follow. We could be more like Jesus, balanced, unfazed, level-headed, disciplined, decisive, clear, in the middle of overwhelming chaos and endless noise. Because if we choose better, then we really won't be under the influence of everything endless. Dear Heavenly Father, you built us with amazing minds that allow us to adapt in a very, very complex world. And yet at the same time, the things that matter most require us to pause, to step away from all of the options, from all of the things that are drawing us away. And yet for many of us, that pause is one of the hardest things for us to do. God, in a world where most of us feel a lot like Martha, there's so much to do and not enough time or energy or help to get it all done. God, help us to choose better, like Mary chose better. God, technology is just going to grow exponentially. And with it, so many tools that we can leverage. But God, give us the courage just this week to put into practice intentional choice around the things that are even better, especially our time with you. I pray these things in Jesus' name.